We are lucky to be back in person. Last time we held it at the Bay Model. Unfortunately, the Bay Model is not, cannot accommodate late weekend evening events any longer, but that's why we're very lucky to have found the Pines. I hope you guys are comfortable here. This is a beautiful place and we're very lucky. Just a couple of announcements. There is a restroom at the back of the room, and after this meeting, we are all going to go upstairs and enjoy some food and drink. We'll talk about the route later because it can be confusing and we don't want to lose anybody. So with that, I'm going to call this meeting to order. We have a packed agenda, so we're going to move it right along. The FHA has recently voted in a new slate of officers, and I'm going to introduce them now. Again, I'm Pete Hudson. I'm president of the FHA. I've been living on Main Dock for 20 years. Our vice president is Liz Brott. Liz has been on West Pier for about 5 years. When I call your name, if you just kind of raise your hand, you don't have to get up or anything, just raise your hand and so people know you exist. We actually do have a slate of real people. The new secretary is Candace Gold, and Candace is part of the community. She's been part of the community and on Issaquah Dock for about 16 years. Our new treasurer, who is not here tonight, is Linda Fertrell, and she's on gate 6.5. So this is a new year. I look forward to working with the board and continue to integrate the FHA into our community. And we look forward to hearing from you all as well, and how best to enhance your experience here on the waterfront. So keep up your membership, tell your friends, and get involved. Thank you. Now tonight, we also bid farewell to outgoing President Mike Labate. Michael unfortunately cannot be here, but Michael was at the helm of the FHA for about 3 years, and his shoes, as I am finding, are going to be hard to fill. Thank you, Michael, for your steady leadership, calm demeanor, and of course the sense of humor. His work and dedication has always been appreciated by all of us. So thank you, Michael. We are also bidding farewell to our outgoing FHA treasurer, Tracy Corbin. We will hear from Tracy in a bit, if she's not trying to work the soundboard and finding tape and getting me water. Thank you, Tracy, for all your work today. Tracy counted the money, kept us all honest and legal, and now she leaves us at the waterfront for a house in the country. But Tracy, you will always be part of our community. Going to happen all night? Well, hello. You know what? I think if I point these at the speakers, they can. Yeah. I get it. Okay, we're going to start here. First of all, I'm going to introduce first of all, I'm going to introduce the FHA Board of Directors. This includes the directors at large, the committee chairs, and the dock reps. First, I'd like to introduce the directors at large, Flo Horlman, Henry Bear, Kathleen Boschetto. I think I saw Catherine here. Oh, there's Catherine. And Larry Clinton. Current committees and their chairs are, the Environmental Committee is Doug Young. Emergency Preparedness, again, Flo Horlman. Private Tours is Mari Stino. Government Affairs, Teddy Hathaway. Is Teddy here tonight? Okay. And Public Relations is Michelle Affronte. Okay, here we go. So the dock reps are a vital information conduit between the residents on the docks and the FHA board. It's the responsibility of the dock reps to report to the board activities to their docks, and it's the dock reps that provide the opportunity to the residents to voice their opinions, their ideas, and their concerns. No complaints, though. Each dock has a dock rep and an alternate. I will now introduce them to you. If you are here, please raise your hand and just, again, see that you exist. South 40, and I'm going to name the dock rep, and then the second name I name is will be the alternate. So South 40, it's Michael Conrad and Nick Bershowitz. West Pier, we have Aislinn Green and Liz Brott. East Pier, Carolyn Engermeyer and Jason Landis. Gate 6.5, Larry Clinton, there's Larry again, and Alan Vandeman. Commodore is Monica Morant and Sasha Cole. Yellow Ferry, Kimberly White and Diane Cromer. A-Dock, Davia Len and Barbara Rizerski. Issaquah, Betty Ann Cram and Denise Kendall. Liberty, Ann Matronga and Taylor Ray. Right on. Is that Taylor back there? Oh, good. Glad you made it. Main Dock, Nancy Hardaway and Peter Hewson. That's Hewson, not Hudson. I used to be the Main Dock rep, but I found someone much more reliable. Van Dam, Melissa Pergerson and Erica Lavina. And I also have, and tonight we'd also like to introduce a very exciting addition to the FHA. After a long search, we were able to finally find a new master of our website. I'd like to introduce Stanton. Hi, Stanton. Thanks. Stanton joins us as a contract webmaster who has a lot of ideas to improve and take our website well into the 21st century and beyond. Needs to go there. We will look forward to working with Stanton, of course, and unveiling to you all of the improvements that Stanton will hopefully make for us. Now, I have to acknowledge Mr. Jim Rateau. Jim created the website that we have today, and he took us from the 19th century and into the early part of the 21st century. So we really have to appreciate what Jim did, and Jim, thanks for all you did. We really appreciate it. You really got us where we're going. So by this time next year, we will have a website that is going to be a real tool, hopefully. No, in a good sense. A useful tool. All right. Okay, now it's time to introduce our one and only Larry Clinton, who will be giving us a rundown on what the FHA did last year. Larry?
Well, as you can imagine, 2022 was kind of a bounce back year after 2 years of pandemic shutdown. But we did get quite a few things accomplished that we're quite proud of. The main one was the passage of rent stabilization legislation, which you're going to be hearing more about in just a couple of minutes. This year we staged 2 free days in the park. Usually it's been one in the fall. This time we did one in the spring as well. And I hope you all turned out for that because it was a great time each time. In addition, the FHA Environmental Committee was able to work with Waldo Point Harbor to have a third electrical vehicle charging station installed right near where you picked up the shuttles today to come up here. And the other major accomplishment is that we restarted our small group tours, which look like they're going to replace our open homes tour as the major fundraising vehicle for the FHA. So we have an ambitious plan to try to get together two a month. If we do that, we'll produce about as much gross income as we did with one open homes tour and with far less overhead. So that's going to be very important, and Mari and Teddy Hathaway are spearheading that effort, and if you would like to help them, they'd love to hear from you. So those are some of the things that we've done so far, and we have a lot to look forward to for 2023. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah. Next up, that's our outgoing treasurer. Tracy Corbin will provide us the treasurer's report and tell us where all the money went. Oh, well, you might need this.
I might need a mic. Okay, great numbers. I know everyone loves numbers. I'll keep this brief because Larry said that the actual P&L is going to be going out in the floating times in coming weeks, so you can look at all the detail if you're so inclined. But overall, we ended 2022 with a net loss of about $19,000, which we had anticipated losing about $16,000 because we weren't having a tour this year, and typically in non-tour years, we do lose a bunch of revenue. However, this year we did have a large additional expenditure with the AB 252 consultants that were retained, and we did fundraise to recoup some of those expenses, but we still ended up about $9,000 short on that. So that's where that shortfall is. We also had an additional day in the park this year, so that was an additional $4,800 expenditure there. But on the income side, we did come out ahead on private tours. As Larry mentioned, this is a great vehicle for fundraising going forward, and those really helped us get some money in this year, as well as some private donations and ad income on the Floating Times website and on the website and Floating Times. We did fall short in our membership income by about $2,000, so your memberships are really important to us, so please thank you for joining, and tell your friends and neighbors to join, because we do rely on the income to put on our events and do things for the community. We still have some, we're still able to end the year with over $50,000 in the bank, despite a greater loss than we had anticipated. So we were able to temper our unbudgeted losses through a decreased spending in other categories, as well as the increased income. So overall, we're in a really strong position, but as I mentioned, we are a membership organization, and we do rely on individual contributions to keep up our work. So thank you so much. Oh, sorry. As I mentioned, we did come in under what we had anticipated, but we are a member organization, and we're really relying on everybody's donations and contributions. So thank you for that, and just to realize that it is very important to us. So thank you.
It's 6 o'clock, obviously. Thank you, Tracy. The next item on the agenda is the presentation of the Member of the Year Award. Now, the FHA gives out this award every year to a member that has gone above and beyond, showed up and dug in as a volunteer to help the FHA. Tonight's recipient always shows up at the board meetings. She rallies her doc to get involved. She keeps up doc membership. She asks the right and sometimes the hard questions. She created and maintains our service providers list, and she's always willing to help out. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to present the 2023 FHA Member of the Year Award to Carolyn Engemeyer. Yeah, sure, you can come up. This is for you.
If I had even suspected this, I would have dressed up.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Okay. All right. So if I talk, it goes away. All right. Tonight, though, we also have a special award. It goes to a well-known member of the FHA and our community. When he's not interpreting the rich history of Sausalito with the Historical Society, he's up in front of a computer single-handedly, mind you, contributing to editing and publishing the Floating Times. He shows up at every FHA meeting, keeps us honest, and probably is the only one who knows the bylaws without having to look them up. He's a wealth of institutional knowledge and wisdom. Words used to describe this man includes dedicated, passionate, generous, and caring. And just to note, we wouldn't be sitting here in the Pines if it wasn't for him. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to present the FHA Community Appreciation Award to our friend and neighbor, Mr. Larry Clinton.
Share that enjoyment and join us as we move forward with the Floating Homes Association.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, up next. Assembly Bill 252 was signed by Governor Newsom last September and became law on January 1st, protecting 477 floating homes from rent increase. AB 252 limits annual birth rate rents to 3% plus CPI or 5%. Anna's going to correct me on all this later. And prohibits marina owners from increasing birth rates upon sale. Now, to tell us more about AB 252 and what it really is about, we've invited Anna Shimko. Anna's an attorney with Burke, Williams, and Sorensen, and a Maine Dock resident for 20 years. And we also Joe Novitsky. And Joe, I have a line here that says, fill in what Joe, my mistake. But anyway, now Anna and Joe will provide some background, and then we'll get into some Q&A. Some of you have wrote questions on the way in, and if you did, we'll bring them up front. But if a question comes to you during the presentation, wave down one of our volunteers and they'll give you a card and a pen, and you can write it down and then wave it at us again, and we'll get it up front. We are on a time limit this evening, so we may not get to all your questions, but you'll have another chance. The FHA is planning to have a more formal Q&A. It's an AB 252 virtual town hall information panel meeting in the next month or so. And you'll then have the opportunity to ask more questions and really get and dig into this thing. Okay, so let's get to it. Anna and Joe.
Stand.
Wherever.
Oh, we get 2 microphones. Yay, it works.
Oh, boy.
All right.
Feedback. Thank you, Pete. To fill in what Joe lives on 12 East, lives on East Pier at number 12, and I've been here since 2011. I became involved in the AB 252 lobbying group fairly early on, although Michael Van Walt and Peter Teague and Anna preceded me.
I'm not certain that's correct, but I think I came along later.
My assignment tonight is to give you the background, which I would like to start off by doing a little description as a layman of what kind of laws we live under as houseboat owners and residents. This is California law and us, from a layman's point of view. Begging your pardon, ma'am. We own residential property. We who own houseboats own residential property under California law. We are single-family dwellings, normally. There are some multifamily exceptions, but in general terms, we're under California residential property law. The marinas however, own commercial property. And marina commercial, that is governed by the commercial code. The commercial property, well, it's akin to a strip mall. And there are different rules about what expenses can be passed through to tenants who are paying rent. We are tenants who are paying rent in commercial property. We have a very specific law called the Floating Homes Residency Law, which was passed in 1990. We owe some of that to Larry Clinton and his group. It was patterned on the Mobile Home Residency Law. I always knew in my trashy little heart that we were a floating trailer park. But that's what happened, because the thing we have in common is that we, like they, own our residences and are governed by residential law. But we do not own where we live, and we have to rent that under commercial terms, like 7-Eleven or a clothes store or a shoe store. That is what we have in common, but they, unlike floating homes, they do have some, there are many mobile home parks in California. There are, some of them are being bought up and taken out, but in general terms, there are more mobile home parks by far than there are floating home marinas on San Francisco Bay. When the state of California created the San Francisco Bay and Conservation and Development Commission, known to all of us as the BCDC, when they created that, they created what amounts to a monopoly. It's a monopoly of many parts. We don't have anywhere to move to, and floating and mobile home owners do. It's difficult, but they can move elsewhere. That's the basic background. Then, when did this all start? How did AB 252 get underway? In December of 2021, the Barn Hill Marina on the northeastern corner of Alameda was bought by new owners who in January, in the following month, notified their tenants in writing that there were going to be that rental increases were going to be necessary in order to keep the marina operating and in good repair. Subsequently, in February, the boat owners, there are 40 there, private owners, 2 of the boats, there are 42 boats, 2 belong to the marina. They received a 29-page lease, which included 100 to 200% rental increases. And they also notified all of the tenants that upon sale, that is vacancy, when a houseboat was sold, the rental would go up even more substantially, which is kind of the practice here as well in Sausalito. The Barn Hill owners appealed first to the owners. The boat owners appealed to the marina owners and tried to negotiate. The negotiations did not prosper. And so they appealed to the city council. And the city council of Alameda consulted with the California State Legislative Council, and found that even those single-family dwellings cannot have rent control by law, the commercial property that the single-family dwellings live in, the marinas, could have a rent control provision. No, it was not a very far reach because mobile home parks got rent control in 2020. So they applied, this group at the Barn Hill Marina, applied to the city council. The city council found its way to put the marina and all houseboats in Alameda City under the city's rent control ordinance after the state had said it's okay in this case. Then that same group, now with the participation of Michael Van Walt and Peter Teague, whom you know here probably, they began to talk to legislators in Sacramento, and Assemblyperson Mia Bonta agreed in June of 2022 to carry a bill which went forward through the House, then the Senate. There were public hearings. At the public hearings, opposition from the California Recreational Boaters Association and the California Marina Owners Association. At a minimum, there was a third group who opposed the legislation on the grounds that it was limiting their ability to operate. But the legislation was changed, and Anna will address that. The legislation was changed so that it applies only to houseboat marinas and only in 3 counties in the Bay Area: Alameda, Contra Costa, and Marin. That's where we are. And when did Sausalito join? We joined up really in the effort in May of 2022. The public hearings were successful in the sense that there were modifications to the legislation. The legislation passed the Senate, then passed the House, and was signed into law by Governor Newsom. That's where we are with what amounts to rent control, but the law is sunsetted and expires in 2030.
Well, you should know many laws are introduced in the state that do sunset. A lot of the housing laws that are fairly recent have sunsets, and it's not uncommon for sunsetted bills to get extended. It's kind of like, let's see how it goes, and then extend it if it works. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the bill says. Joe did the how the bill becomes a law, and I'm going to tell you what it means for us. As Pete correctly said, the new law provides that your annual houseboat berth rent, I love how Pete referred to it as the birth rate's going up. We happen to live on Main Dock, and since we moved there, the birth rate's gone way up. And we contributed to that ourselves. Anyhow, the rent may not go up in 1 year by, an increase can be no greater than 3% plus the percent change in the cost of living based on CPI, and we'll talk about that, or 5%, whichever is lower. So that's a tongue twister. The limitation applies to existing tenants, and it also applies, as Joe mentioned, upon the sale of a floating home that stays in the same berth where it is. That's referred to as an in-place transfer. And in rent control parlance, that's referred to usually as vacancy control. Honestly, it is unusual in rent control to have vacancy control. I believe that in the mobile home context and the floating home context, it was recognized that these are unique types of housing, very difficult to move, and that you may have a loss of equity if you're attempting to sell your houseboat and the rent to a new owner is going to go up dramatically. So under AB 252, the rent goes up only that amount per year, even if it's transferred to a new owner. The bill did not specifically address the rent upon renewal of a lease. For instance, if you have a 10-year lease with a 10-year option and that period has expired and you're doing a new lease, it doesn't address that. However, that would be for an existing tenancy, so the bill would apply. And now I'm going to force us all to get our heads into math before we start drinking wine. Seemed like the right progression of events. So the way that it works is, as an example, if the CPI is 1%, then your rent can go up by 4%. That would be the CPI plus the 3%. However, if the CPI is 4%, then the rent goes up by 5%, because the change in CPI plus 3% would be 7%, and it has to be no more than 5%. So there the bill would come into play, and the cap, or we call those a ceiling, comes into play. What's important, however, is not to ignore your lease. And we in this room have a lot of different leases because we live in different harbors, and or we got leases at different times from the same harbor, and they vary. So the lease has to be taken into account as well. And basically, per the new law, you get whatever best rent price is calculated per either the state law or your lease. So for instance, we live in Waldo Point Harbor. We have a Waldo Point Harbor lease that provides that the rent goes up by the CPI, but no greater than 7.5%. So that means that for us, the part about CPI plus 3% simply doesn't come into play. The only thing that applies to us is the CPI because that's what the lease says, but the ceiling applies. So even though our lease says that our rent can go up by up to 7.5%, that's no longer the case because it can only go up by 5%. Now, this year, the stars almost perfectly aligned as between our lease and AB 252 because the CPI increase, the way it's defined under our lease, was 4.9%. So under our lease, our increase was 4.9%, which is pretty much almost exactly where AB 252 would max out anyhow. And then one thing I would note is that we need to be mindful not just of the interaction between your lease and the limits of AB 252, but also the timing of the CPI determination, because I have noticed that the timing used in AB 252 is different than the CPI definition in our lease. For instance, our lease pins the CPI to the nearest preceding reported CPI as the measure of our rent increase. So ours was based on, because our lease comes due in March, ours was based on December 2022, because that's the most recent one, compared to December 2021. And so the change was 4.9%. However, AB 52 uses a different time frame, and if the rent revision occurs before August of any year, then the CPI change is based on the prior year's April CPI compared to the year before that. But if
It does get complicated.
Yeah, it does get very
Read
complicated.
your lease.
Exactly. And so you need to be mindful, again, of the intersection between your lease and the CPI. And under AB 252, if the rent increase occurs after August, then the CPI basis is the April of that year compared to the preceding April. And if it would be helpful for us to write all of that up and have it available to you, I'd be happy to do that. And now I believe we are ready to take any questions. I'm not certain that we had any submitted on cards.
I think we did. Carol has some.
Great.
our resident, oh, there were no questions.
Carol has cards. You
Carol
know,
has cards.
I suggest that we skip the card in the interest of time and do the raise your hand and shout out your question. Okay, so man with card in hand, please tell us what your card was going to say.
What was the question? I'm sorry, here.
Thank you so much for giving us all this information. My question has to do with a conversation that I had with the harbor master and a letter that was sent by the principal owner of Waldo Point. And you probably know what that is.
We do,
Okay, so
and we've met with her.
great. Could you tell us how this will affect the harbor, especially Waldo Point, at this point, if indeed this law goes through? Because we heard. It's through. Right, but then.
Go ahead, finish the question.
But then last week, Bill Price told me, he said that they are working very hard to turn this law around and clarify it so that new homes will be assessed at a higher level. And I don't know if that
Yeah.
means.
So we have
anything.
heard the same things, and thank you for the question. We got the letter, and some of us did meet with Sue Cook, the owner of Waldo Point Harbor. It was a very friendly, very good meeting. Thank you to the Angermeyers for hosting it. Lovely home. Anyhow, we can't really know what the impact is on them because we do not and would not appropriately ever see their books. But what we've been informed by Waldo Point Harbor is that given the expenditures that they made on all of the improvements due to the new permits, and they are lovely, that they have a significant debt and that they were counting on being able to start turning a profit. I can't tell you these things are true. I'm just repeating what we've been told. By bringing rents up to market, and many would tell you, what is the market? How do you find the market, given that we're such a small sample? But bringing rents up to market when houseboats sell. And so at that point, they would be able to have new leases with higher rents. And they were doing that for a while, and now they are no longer able to do that. And that seems to be the greatest sticking point to them, is the inability now to raise rents to a more market rate level upon sale of houseboats. I do suspect that that's also the case upon renewal of a lease, when you get to the end of a term and they are giving you a new lease, that they also may wish to raise rents at that point. I can tell you that we just got to the end of 20 years. It's been that long, Michelle. And we were given a one-year lease. And that, to me, that causes concern. And actually, the floating home residency law does say that the term of a lease shall be 12 months, longer or shorter as agreed by the parties, or as long as is necessary to obtain a conventional loan. And I don't think 12 months is going to do it. So that's a discussion to be had. But we do understand that there is a move afoot by them, and they have every right to do it, but to try and get some changes in the law. We don't know what those are. We have not been engaged in those conversations with them to date.
The way it would work, briefly, is that they would find someone to introduce what's called a reform bill, which would refer to the previous legislation and modify it in some way. And then, of course, it goes through the legislative process, which allows for public hearing and the expression from everyone in the room, as well as Alameda and Contra Costa counties.
And there is a spot bill that's been introduced, I believe, by Assemblymember Bonta, just in case there are clarifications.
That's a placeholder.
Thank you, Diane here. When I bought my home 3 years ago, the rent went up like 40%. So I was, I guess you could say, a victim of that big change. So I know there's nothing to do about the past, but I'm assuming that. But I think that it's important to point that out, that a lot of people who recently bought homes had to pay that huge increase. And I guess the other thing in terms of, so the question is, in terms of transparency with the owners, is understanding exactly what that rent goes to. And like, there's a lot of issues on the dock, and so I just think some transparency in terms of the books, and is that feasible to do?
And my answer off the bat, Joe may have a different take on it, but I do commercial real estate law, and I would say no. That no, unless we came to some type of agreement with the owners, and we have talked about this as maybe a possibility. If there were a couple of people that were going to review their books and they were going to do so in a confidential manner, that's one thing. But they're a business, they're operating a business, and they have a right to keep their books closed.
And I'm in Kappa's Marina, and I can assure you that the Kappa's Marina management does not share, ever. They've been operating without a permit since 1994. And they do not inform you, even though the floating homes residency requires. And Waldo Point Harbor complies, as does Yellow Ferry. They comply with the requirement to notify you as tenants of the status of their permit from the BCDC. Kappa's doesn't. Ma'am?
Each year when we get our rent increase, I'm wondering if, based on past experience with particularly Waldo Point Harbor, because that's where I live, can we trust Waldo Point Harbor to give us the correct figure for our rent increase? Or should we actually sit down and go through all these formulas to figure it out for ourselves?
I haven't seen them get it wrong yet. And I know that they have counsel and people advising them. So I would think that they would want to do it correctly, but there's no reason not to double check it. It's very easy online to find the CPI, for instance. And then, if your lease says it goes by the CPI, then you can find that and you know what it is. And it can't be more than 5%.
My lease was renewed, just renewed, and I got my annual rent increase. The property managers for Kappa's Marina cited AB 252 and said the increase would be 5%, even though the CPI, which is what governs in the lease, the CPI was 4.9. I don't have the money to go to court for 1/10 of 1%. Yeah, Wilford.
It seems to me that it would be fairly hard for them to overturn this or change it. But I really want to find out from you, what are the steps that they would have to go through to be able to overturn it?
Either of us can speak to that, but the steps would really be the very same steps as were taken last year to get the bill approved. So a legislator, it could be in the Assembly, it could be in the Senate, has to agree to introduce language to change the bill. So that's one for sure. And then there is at least one committee hearing, and anyone can speak at the committee hearing and of course have meetings with their legislators and just participate in the process. And then it would have to go to the floor of both the Assembly and the Senate.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melanie. I live on Liberty. I have a situation, I'm not sure how common it is. If it's uncommon, there's no need to address it in this forum. But the situation is that we have a float that exceeds the restrictions that are set by Waldo Point. And so when we purchased the property, they said your float is illegal, but since you have it, you can pay an extra $300 a month for it. And it just, I have never been able to make any sense. I've got a lot of attorneys in my family, and I'm pretty used to legalese. I have never been able to make sense of how that is. And I don't know if it comes into play with this, or if our houseboat is the only one that has this issue going on, so.
It's not an isolated issue. However, we haven't really seen the floats and boats issue surface since about maybe 2018-19 was when we were going through a lot of that. Unfortunately, if you have a lease and it doesn't show a float, or it shows a float that's smaller, then it's a violation of the lease to have a float that's bigger or to have a float that's not allowed. So they have every right under the law to tell you that it's not appropriate. At the same time, the only reason they really, in my view, this is my opinion, the only reason they really should be concerned about floats is if they would violate the BCDC permit, because a float constitutes water coverage, and there's a certain square footage under the BCDC permit of water coverage that they're allowed overall. Obviously, they're not going to be in compliance with the permit by you paying an extra $300 a month, so there's a bit of a disconnect there. But I also have spoken a number of years back, but with staff at BCDC that said, look, we think floats are great. They enable recreational use of the bay, and as Flo Hoylman will tell you every day of the week, and she's right, they also are a significant safety factor. So I haven't really seen them go after people lately, but if it became an issue, I do think that it's one very worthy of action. Involving BCDC and ensuring that the fact that a number of people whose floats were not shown on the BCDC permit, because the BCDC permit actually shows the outline of every house and float. So to the extent that it wasn't indicated on that, making sure that we can comfort the harbor that that's not going to present an issue in the future. So I think it would be a process, but one very worthwhile.
All of you are aware that the BCDC defines houseboats, docks, and floats, both personal and of the marina, as fill. They are in law, in BCDC, by BCDC regulation. We are all the equivalent of truckloads of dirt dumped into the bay. Was there a question in the back?
I know a few months ago, maybe a year ago, you did a survey of slip fees. Was there an article or was there a summary about that survey? I'm just curious.
Survey of what?
Slip fees.
We did a survey. The FHA asked a group of us to do what was called a lease study. And we compared all of the leases that we had available, and basically those were Waldo Point Harbor Old and Waldo Point Harbor New, Kappas Marina, and we never got a Varda Landing, and Yellow Ferry, but it was apparently out of date. If that's what you're referring to, that was summarized. I have the summary here with me if you'd like to consult it. The differences are interesting, but it was only about the leases, not the fees. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that. And yes, Susan?
How do we donate to support AB 252?
Well, you heard in the treasurer's report that we came up $9,000 short in gathering money to pay the lobbyist consultant, legal legislative consultant, who helped us help the entire group and all of the marinas in 3 counties push this through the legislature. It would be a very good thing, I think, if you were able to contribute further to those who have not yet contributed. If you write a check to the FHA and put in the tagline what we've done, or in the memo, you put AB 252, AB 252, and then, make it for 252. Sorry.
Or double that. So we have time for just a couple more questions if anybody has them, and if not, we can, oh, over here. See, we can't see that, beyond the tree. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let me give you this. Thanks.
My question is, I live on Yellow Ferry Harbor. The owner of our dock has decided to add $150 a month to our rent, but calling it a climate change fee. So future renovations that he might have to do down the road because of global warming, sea rising. So I'm curious, to me, it's a rent increase by another name. And how is this going to affect everybody, and how should we deal with it on our personal dock? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
I actually have an
Additional
answer.
rents, and the lawyer has the answer. There's a question in the back, and I'll take that.
Oh, so first off, I'd like to say that nothing you hear from either Joe or Anna this evening is legal advice or legal opinion, and is only the opinion that is not provided by my firm or Joe's company, and is only, for the good of the order. I know that that's been a question at Yellow Ferry Harbor, and in the floating home residency law, and I may not find it right this minute, but I'm happy to find it for you later. The harbors can charge for rent, utilities, and necessary fees to provide reasonable services. So any additional fee has to be for the purpose of providing a specific additional reasonable service. And so if you felt that that were not the case with the climate change fee, that there's not a service being provided, that's something that you could bring to their attention.
Now, there is a provision, I'm not sure about the current Yellow Ferry lease, but there are provisions in both the Waldo Point Harbor lease and the Capas Marina leases for what are called additional rents. And additional rents are in the wordings of the Capas Marina wording is much more clear than the Waldo Point Harbor. What it amounts to, and they name names and cases, if the BCDC tells us we have to invest this much in coming up to their expectations in order to get a permit, then we are going to pass that cost through on a pro rata basis. The Waldo Point Harbor contract was more favorable. It had an amortization schedule, and it was a shared expense between the tenants and the marina owners.
With 80% on the tenants.
Yes, and 20 for the owners, but nonetheless it was shared. In the Capas Marina lease, it is 100% for the tenant, and it's called additional rents. And a group of us paid too much to a lawyer to find out that that is commercial code, and there is case law to support it. So I suggest reading your lease is probably a thing you could do now, because if there's a clause for additional rents, it might fall under that clause.
But it does need, so I did find the citation, and other than rent and utilities, they can charge for incidental reasonable charges for services actually rendered, and those have to be listed in the lease.
So if they're not listed in the
And that was our last question, and thus our final answer.
Well, now we come to our keynote speaker, Felicia Gaston. For those of you who don't know Felicia, she formed the Performing Stars of Marin in 1990 in Marin City. We've been fortunate enough to have members from that troupe entertain us at floating homes tours and our days in the park. She also recently formed the Marin City Historical Society, and in her spare time, she's been a book publisher. The first book is Grandmothers Feed Us Love. These are recipes from some of the older women of Marin City, and you'll be able to have a chance to win a prize of that book, and it's also available through Felicia in Marin City. She's working on another book, which is a commemorative history of Marin City, and when that becomes available, I'll be excerpting it in the Floating Times with information about how you can purchase it. So please help me welcome Felicia Gaston.
Good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here. I've known Larry throughout the years on various projects. I would like to acknowledge one of your former floating home residents, Pam Bousquet. She was a super great mentor to me, a friend. She volunteered her time when she retired as a district attorney, and she would come over to Marin City to advise me to help another program that I was involved in called the Phoenix Project. And Pam is surely dearly missed, but one thing I can say about Pam is that I learned a lot about the floating homes and all the struggles that you all have been going through many years. So we have a lot in common with Marin City and Sausalito because it's always about fighting for your rights. As Larry mentioned, I started Performing Stars 33 years ago. I am the founder of Marin City Performing Stars. We serve children and families and communities. Over the years, we started out just as art organization. We provide scholarships to children who live in low-income areas. We serve children throughout the county. We start them at age 3. We follow them until they get into high school. Now we have a program that provides paid internships for them. Over the years, we have served over 3,000 kids, and many of them have gone on to be very successful in many careers. How I got involved with the Marin City history is when I first started working in Marin City, I had a chance to meet all of the grandparents and all of the people who came to work during the shipyard days. And what I really admired about them is that they told me their stories. I would ask them, what made you come to Marin City? And then they start really going into details about how they came from the South, how they left the segregated South, how they migrated, leaving the Jim Crow South to make a better life for themselves. And what I also uncovered during that time too is that Marin City was one of the 4 shipyards that around the Bay Area. There was Sausalito Marine Ship, there was a Bayview Hunters Point, there was Richmond and Vallejo. But the significant about Marin City is that the shipyards was people came from all over. Marin City was the only integrated shipyards. Marin City was the only housing that was integrated because people came from all over. People came from the South, people came from the Midwest. There was whites, blacks, Chinese Americans that lived in San Francisco. It was known as the most integrated and the most family-oriented. You can imagine when people came to work here, it was looked at as a sociological experiment. Even Congress people would come out and they would say, this is unusual because you have blacks coming from the South from the segregation, you have whites, but everybody was living together. So that's what's so very significant. But what's even more significant is that whites were allowed to purchase homes. The government was given federal loans at 4%. So even though that people were they were all living together, but the whites knew automatically that they were not going to live in Marin City. So right in 1943, there was conversations that was held at the county. There was conversations that was held at the local independent journal. What are we going to do with the blacks? There were conversations post-war For instance, I found newspaper articles that talk about post-war Marinship. What are we going to do with the blacks when the war was over? In my PowerPoint presentation, we will bring this out, and as Larry mentioned, the book that I have coming out next month is called A Brand New Start, This Is Home. What's even more significant, I'm not sure if many of you have been to the Bay Model, and you would see the images of people who worked in the shipyards, but there is only about 20 images of blacks that worked in the shipyards. There were 20,000 black people who worked in the shipyards. And this book that I am producing and will be out next month is going to reveal the struggles. It's going to talk about the outside influences, the blacks who have had to have many challenges. In Marin City to this date, 80 years, we have still going through the challenges of just surviving. It's very important. I am a resident now. I lived in San Francisco when I first started working in Marin City. And again, I was able to get oral histories. I was able to, this is even before we had iPhones and video cameras, so I would actually listen to the seniors. I would write their stories down. I would transcribe them, and this is how I'm able to put this book together. We can start with the PowerPoint. Yeah, and I have to get on this side. Again, the name of the book is called A Brand New Start, This Is Home, and it talks about all the blacks. Primarily, I'm focusing on the blacks, even though I know that Marin City and the people who came in the shipyards, it was very integrated, but we want to tell the lost stories. We want to tell the stories that have never been shared. We'll go to the next slide. I'm going to have to slide over here some more. Don't get it. Okay. So, and I focused on this 1942 to 1960 with this presentation. We recently had an exhibit at the Marin County Civic Center, the Bartolini Gallery, and we were able to highlight the 1942 to 1960. It was an extraordinary exhibit. It was the first time that something like this had been shown at the Civic Center. It was something that our community was proud of, and if any of you were able to come see this exhibit, it really gave you some foresight about Marin City. We do have the exhibit that is shown right now on Marin Community Television, and I'll make sure Larry gets that link and he can send this out to you. But primarily, I just want to get down a little more. We just want to talk about Marin City. It's a national story. It's a California Black history. Sorry about that. Okay. We want to talk about places. We want to talk about their experiences. We want to say that this is a California Black history story. Next slide, Larry.
Presentation view.
Can you make it, you say make it larger?
Anybody here?
Okay. They want to make it larger. We want to talk about the Great Migration from 1942 to 1960. Again, there's so much history about Marin City. I decided to just focus on these years. These were very significant years, especially because how we talk about. Okay. So primarily, we're talking about the blacks who came from the western rim of the South. They wanted to leave the Jim Crow South. They wanted to leave the racial discrimination that was happening, the segregation. They bought a one-way ticket. They were vowed not to go back to the South. they started a new life for themselves. Many of them were teenagers when they came here. Many of them were single. And when they came out here, then they brought their other family members, and they came out here to build the ships, and it was happening all around where the Bay Model is back there. And we just want to highlight that they were patriotic. They were not looking back, and they were making their actions to change the course of American history, and Marin City's legacy is here to stay. This map shows what happened with the migration with blacks, even the movement that was happening in 1915, how many Southern blacks migrated from the South. They moved primarily to the North and Western states, but primarily in the 1940s is when Marin City, and primarily the blacks from Marin City, but also we're talking about people that came all over the United States, and they came to work in the shipyards, and there are even shipyards that was in Portland, Oregon. Next, Larry. This announcement, it just primarily just talks about the call to that went out over the entire United States, the flyers that went out all over the South, all over the Midwest, that people had to travel either by Greyhound bus or they had the train, Southern Pacific or Union Pacific. You see the train station and the bus station, and it shows how there were a mixture of people together, but they also had to deal with the segregation. I had the chance to do a lot of school tours and of the exhibit, and it was amazing to tell the young children how blacks had to go to separate restrooms, how they had to bring their own food in shoe boxes because they were not allowed to purchase food at the dining car, or even if they were at the bus stop, they were not able to purchase the food from the food stand unless they had to go to the back, but it was just primarily that they would bring their food in a shoebox. Here we talk about how the housing was developed by the Marin Housing Authority, the federal government. They were temporary housing. They were only meant to last 5 years. Again, over the years when we talk about how the new apartments were built, they came 18 years later, but these houses were only built to be temporary. Okay. This shows the type of housing, and we were able to work with the Sausalito Historical Society, where we were able to get a lot of these images. Imagine Marin City when you see what it looks like now, but all of the housing was over the entire Marin City. It just wasn't on where the headlands of condos are now. All the temporary housing was spread out throughout the entire Marin City. And as you can see, there were no sidewalks, there were no concrete, there's just dirt roads. And again, these temporary housing stayed up for 18 years. The announcement again is just showing the what types of housing was available, the apartments, the dormitory rooms. There again was Marin City. Marine ship workforce was no more than 43% blacks. People came from all over. It was a frightening experience at first. However, people did get along. Again, when the federal government was giving out the loans in 1943, many of the whites started purchasing homes outside of Marin City. The blacks were not able to purchase houses because of the red line in the real estate and not being able to purchase. However, the Marin City black residents, they were fine with that. They were like, this is way better than living in the Jim Crow South. And imagine the beautiful view of the Pacific Ocean. Who would want to go back there anyway? Next. Okay. Here we talk about Marin City black residents have always persisted against the case of significant odds. A black community largely in a white-only county. There is even documentation that I have researched that found out that in the 1950s, There were conversations at the county, that the Civic Center, there was discussions about bringing the Marin County Civic Center to where Marin City is now because of the ideal location. However, after many conversations, they decided we want to keep it in San Rafael. And that Marin City has always dealt with outside influences, developers purchasing the land. Right in the 40s, the 50s, there was a congressman named James Schroyer who purchased a lot of the land. The idea was that if we can just move all the black people out and we make it integrated, however, most of the whites had already moved out by that time, and Marin City became all black community in the 50s. However, Marin City residents always stayed dignified. They kept their pride. There were many black-owned businesses in Marin City. Marin City had, there was barbershops, beauty salons, gas stations, cab drivers, candy stores. There were significant amount of black-owned businesses in Marin City, but all of those were torn down in the 60s by the county redevelopment agencies. And to this date, my thought is that if Marin City was allowed to maintain their family-owned businesses, we would have develop a middle class, because when you think about Sausalito, Mill Valley, this is what makes all cities thrive. If you have family-owned businesses, then you creating generational wealth. But all of that was destroyed in the 60s. This is showing how the housing was happening, and this is happening toward 1959. So you can imagine, and I probably don't even, I think about how this was allowed to stay in Marin County for all these years. How many know about the TV show In the Heat of the Night? And when you see the people who live in the bottoms, and you're like, this is right here, but this is happening right here in Marin County. When I talked to many of the elders before they passed away, they talked about how dilapidated the housing was becoming. Even when it would rain, they would have to move their furniture because the roofs, the rain was leaking in, and they would have to move their furniture to one side of the room. Again, this was allowed to stay up for 18 years because this housing was only to last for 5 years, and Marin Ship closed in 1946. Again, we talk about there was 20,000 African Americans that was employed, but then in September 1946, employment reduced to 12,000. And actually, a lot of the black men went to work for the construction companies, Gelati Brothers, the other construction companies. So a lot of them helped build the freeways that we're riding on now. And then many of the women went to work in the white families' homes in Tiburon, Sausalito, Mill Valley, Belvedere, until many of them, after they were not doing these household work, then many of them went on to get other types of employment in banks and other, like the Marin Water District. But they always still, again, maintain their pride. A lot of the residents, for instance, the men formed the Marin City Rod and Gun Club because they were not able to join the Marin Rod and Gun Club because of this discrimination and segregation. That Rod and Gun Club is still going on today, something that Larry Clinton had put together in one of his publications, that Marin City black women in the 50s and Sausalito white women formed a quilting club. And to me, that was very significant to show that people were really working together. And this quilt went on to win a beautiful award at the Sacramento State Fair. It was in Jet magazine, and that quilt now is in Atlanta, Georgia. When we talk about the infringement from inside and outside, as I'm doing my research, I'm finding all of these headlines. These headlines were in the 50s, but actually in the book that will be out next month, there are many headlines that talk about it talks about Marin City gets a 90-day decree. Marin City is a ghetto. Marin City, we redevelop it. Throughout the whole 80 years, Marin City is still having to deal with outside influences. They're still fighting to this date. Many of you, if you keep up with the local news, the Golden Gate Village resident, the public housing, is always still where Marin City blacks are fighting to just stay, just to be in Marin City. And our numbers are declining in Marin City. However, through the efforts of the Golden Gate Resident Council, there are efforts to bring back some blacks who have been on the waiting list and wanting to get back into the housing in Marin City. This cartoon really pretty much described how a lot of the black residents have always felt about, you know, how we can do this ourselves. You're fighting against outside redevelopment agency, you're fighting against the planning department, and as this quote is saying, please, we would rather do it ourselves. There's always have been advocates in Marin City. There's the tenant council, there was the NAACP. There were people that were always fighting to maintain, to have their rights and to live in Marin City. Again, these headlines are just basically showing that different advocates, the NAACP, the tenant council, and this fight is still going on until this day. I want to thank Marin County Board of Supervisor Vera Schultz. She was the first woman supervisor, and she also was the founder of the Marin County League of Women Voters. It was her efforts who went back to Washington, D.C. to get the federal government to purchase the apartments that you see in Marin City now. And she definitely was a trailblazer. She formed a team of what I call the dream team with Aaron Green, which is a protege of Frank Lloyd Wright, who built and designed the Civic Center. He pulled together a great team of architects, and they did such a wonderful job that those apartments that you see in Marin City now, they won the best designed public housing in the whole United States in the 1960s. Because usually when you look at public housing and projects, it doesn't have like trees, and people who live in Marin City, there are townhomes, people have yards, they have balconies. There was so much that they designed because they wanted Marin City black residents to have pride. Again, Marin City is still fighting because the apartments that people are living in now, there's been a lot of deferred maintenance. So the structures are very strong. Inside of the apartments is built with concrete. It's just a lot of the infrastructure is crumbling, the plumbing. There's so many things that are happening inside, but actually the structure of the buildings are designed and they're very strong. And this is why their efforts to still keep these apartments still up there. But you know, there's so much that the fight is still going on with the county and there's no more redevelopment agency, but there again is still a fight, and it's always still been a continuing fight for blacks to remain in Marin City. But we really want to thank Supervisor Vera Schultz and her efforts. And Marin City is unincorporated. It's been unincorporated for all these years. There's been many conversations throughout the years, like why wouldn't Marin City incorporate? Every 10 years, there's a group of people who come together to say, well, let's make Marin City, let's incorporate it. But then you have another group to say, we don't want Marin City to be incorporated because then we really won't be here. Anytime there's any stereotypes in the newspaper, when you think about there's crime everywhere, but if something happens in Marin City is stereotyped. And there's other groups that say, well, there's people that feel like they won't even be able to live in the public housing. There's there's outside developers who want to tear down the entire public housing. And even when, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the pole homes, these homes were built on telephone poles, and they were built in the early 60s. Those homes were going for like $18,000. Now they are going for over $1 million, and many of the black families are not able to hold on to the homes. And when there's a death in the family, and family members, they decide that they just want to split up the money, and so when the homes sell, then we have a lot of gentrification that's coming into Marin City. Now, granted, Marin City has been gentrified for a long time because we have several developments, apartment complexes. You have the Ridgeway apartments, you have the townhomes, you have the pole homes, and you have Golden Gate Village public housing. Myself, because I run a nonprofit organization, and my organization, I serve children, all diverse children, their families. Diversity is very important, but it's also important that if people want to be able to stay in Marin City, if blacks feel like they want to remain in Marin City, they should feel like they can afford to stay there. Right now in Marin City, public housing is owned by the Marin Housing Authority, and that's the only family complex in Marin City, and where it goes by your income. There's not many places in the county that you can live that goes by your income. And we have families who are living making incomes under $40,000 a year, maybe even less than that. So pretty much this timeline is exploring a brand new start. It just talk about their fight for permanent housing. We go from the 80s to 2022, and now here we are in 2023. And I'm super proud of this book that's coming out, because we're gonna outline, even before Marin City, people came to work in the shipyards. Marin City was occupied by the Miwok Indians, and then also Marin City was a Portuguese family. So there were, it was all dairy farms. Then the federal government came in, and that's when they built all the homes for people to live in, to work in the shipyards. And we're still dealing with these interconnected issues of African American families, just basically have been dealing with racism, housing, discrimination. There are some families that I have known, when they decided to purchase a home outside of Marin City, they were not able to. There are some families that I know that live in Mill Valley now. One of the families told me that even with her husband, who had a GI loan, they had the money, but they were not able to purchase, or even when they were able to purchase a home, either other white families would purchase a home for them in order for them to live outside of Marin City. And one family who lives in Town Valley, she told me that the real estate agent told them that they can look at the house from the outside, but they cannot go on the inside to look at the house. However, you know, they still, again, maintain their pride, their dignity, and they were not looking back. They bought a one-way ticket, and they vowed to make a better life for themselves and their families. Marin City, again, has always been dealing with the fact that that is an authentic community, the fact that they've been struggling with outside power, money, and politics, and they've been able to survive. And, you know, there's still a lot of pride amongst a lot of the families when there are family get-togethers, when the birthday parties. It's the thing that happened. We just had our Black History Month program, and you see a lot of youth and adults and everybody come together. A part of when I put this cookbook together, I really identified a lot of the grandparents and the grandmothers who were born before 1942. And it was amazing to just deal with learning a lot about them. And it's just very important that we keep the legacy alive. Again, if you were not able to see the exhibit that was at the Marin Civic Center, I will send Larry the link because it's featured for the rest of this month on Marin Community Television. And I do also want to bring up, there was a significant civil rights case that happened in the Marin shipyards. During 1943, there was a gentleman named Joseph James. He was a welder, but he also was a performer. And the Bechtel and Marin ship wanted all the blacks to remain in a separate auxiliary. He and others fought this, and they even had the support from Thurgood Marshall. At the time, he was a NAACP attorney, and he came out and represented Marin City. And I would consider that Marin County's first affirmative action case. And we have that information. We had a live play about that. I'll send, again, Larry the link, and he can send to you. You'll be able to see that. Marin City, we've established our Historical and Preservation Society. We have never had one before. All the cities in Marin County have a historical society. We were able to launch this last year after the exhibit, and we are planning big plans for it. We have our website going up soon, and my vision and goal is to have a museum in Marin City, so we can continue the legacy, we can continue collecting the artifacts. There's a building in Marin City that was built, it was owned by a Portuguese family, and that home is still there. And so it's an ideal space for a museum. We just have to work with our local congressmen and all our elected officials. But that's the vision that we see for the Marin City Historical and Preservation Society. But we know that there's going to be a big capital campaign. But in the meantime, we're working on having a traveling exhibit, so this exhibit can go around not only to schools, to libraries. Your support and advocacy would be very appreciated. So thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Felicia. Wonderful. Okay, now everyone, this is one of the last on the agenda is the door prizes. So I'm going to turn it over to Mari and Michelle, and we're going to see who wins. I never do, so.
Do you want to pick the winners? No.
Okay, so, you want me to pick the names first? Okay, we're going to do this quickly tonight. Okay, the first one is Kimberly Wright, and she lives on Yellow Ferry, and you are going to win a 90-minute massage from Allie Johnston. And that's worth $150. Okay, so want to write on the back of it? Okay. Next one is Jane Clinton. She lives at 29 Gate 6.5, and she won a gift certificate to Pojo's. Yes, you're welcome.
Where's her card? Name.
It's right over. Okay. Next one is Nancy Starr. Yes, and she lives on Liberty Dock, and she won 2 tickets for an evening of magic with Jay Alexander. That's a really great one. Have you gone to that yet, Nancy? Oh, good. It's fabulous. It's really fun. Okay, next one. Katrina Wagner. Here you go. And she won a $100 gift certificate to the Trident Restaurant. Have fun. Okay. Linda Davis, is she here? Oh, okay, you won, what did she win?
Let's see, let's give her Katya.
Oh, you're lucky on this one. She won some jewelry from Katya. It's a $75 gift certificate, and most of you know Katya. She makes the most beautiful jewelry. Yeah. Okay, next one is Scott Stonebeck on Main Dock. And you won a $150 gift certificate for window washing. But really? From Steve Saccone Real Estate donated this. Do you want to? Okay, find me later. Okay. Next one is Harriet Strayhorn. They're here, okay, and that will be a $125 gift certificate to Le Garage. And this is from, the donator was Sam Fazio, who does all the insurance for us now. So she donated that. Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah, okay. This one is Michael Angeles. And he won.
Oh, let's see.
Oh, you had a good one too. Rochelle Doris donated $300. Cash. Okay. Okay, and this one, Blaze Simpson. She's from Gate 6.5. Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know. You won a $150 gift certificate to the Buckeye, also donated by generous Sam Fazio, the insurance person. Yeah. Okay, here is Bruce Thomas. Okay. Something for a man. Yes? Okay. Now, you got the big one here. You got a gift certificate to Cavallo Point for one night. And Susan Huxtable was nice enough to... Susan Huxtable arranged that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, this is for Nancy Hardaway. She's from Maine, yeah, okay, and she won, oh, you won Felicia Gaston's book, Grandmothers Feed Us Love, okay? I'll leave it up here for you. And, let's see, Kristen Shannon. Did I say that right? Kristen Shannon? Yes? Okay. You got another gift certificate for window washing from Steve Saccone. Should I just leave that here for you? Okay. And Bonnie Howe, 55 Liberty Ship, 1B. Are you here? Oh, good. Okay. And this is from me. And this is a $300 gift certificate to Restoration Hardware. You can either use it at the restaurant, or you could buy yourself a present, or you could split it and do some restaurant, some shopping. You're welcome. You're welcome. Two more. Carol Angermeyer. Oh, this is really a great one, too. Olivia, what's her last name? I don't know her last name, but Olivia on Liberty Dock. She's an incredible Brazilian chef, and she does dinner parties for people, and it's usually $125 a person. And Mari and I hired her to do a dinner party for us, and it was amazing. So you want dinner for 4 cooked by Olivia, of Brazilian food. Okay. Last one is Claudia Duncan. And you won this beautiful glass piece by Teddy Hathaway. Isn't it beautiful? You're welcome. So, there's nothing. So we didn't do like better ones, I think. We tried to do bigger gifts. And when we have too many gift certificates, it goes on for hours. So anyway, everyone have a great time. We're done.
Just a couple of announcements, folks, please. Can we shut the music down? Well, what I was going to say was really great. You all missed it. Well, I guess they know how to get upstairs.
Excellent, excellent.